Alpine Liquid Fertilizers is your full-season crop fertility specialist from start to finish. Visit alpinepfl.com for more.
Welcome to The Truth About Ag. Welcome to the Truth About Ag podcast, distributed under the Real Ag Media Network and powered by the Hebert Group of Companies. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And remember that Truth About Ag is also brought to you by Farmer Coach, the only entrepreneurial producer coaching program in Canada that offers leadership, finance, and operational training, and Maverick Ag, providing financial and operational confidence to producers across North America. So we got a special guest today, and this one's south of the border, and I had to hit Wikipedia for this one, Kip, so I apologize, but I literally nailed every top one here. So I sent it to Kristjan, and he literally knew where I'd been looking. So I'm gonna give a little intro, and then I'm gonna let you give the real story, okay?
Okay.
So Kip Tom grew up in Indiana on a homestead that started in 1837. Tom farms crops around 16,000 in Indiana and another 4,000 in Argentina. Past chair of both the Texas Executive Agriculture Producers Association and APEX, Association of Global Farm Executives. Winner of the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award, as well as Top Producer of the Year. Sounds somewhat common, Kristjan. Associate's degree from Texas A&M in Ag Economics and an Executive MBA from Harvard. And then lastly, sat as the United States Ambassador to the United Nations Agency for Food and Agriculture. Did I hit all the talking points, Kim, or is there more to you?
Well, there's some things I should probably straighten out in there, but
okay.
The Texas A&M, that was I don't think it was an associate degree, but it's obviously a degree handed on by Texas A&M Extension Service, a program led by Danny Kleinfelder. And then as far as anything at Harvard, that was executive courses that I attended there over the years is what I've done there. But hey, you know what? People write this stuff and put it in Wikipedia. You don't always get a chance to review it yourself. So, but appreciate the introduction. It's great to be with you. It seems like it's just been yesterday that I met Kristjan for the first time at Texas A&M or at our Apex meetings. And then later there was a producers meeting up in Saskatoon, maybe. I'm not sure where it was at. I know it was up close to Nutrien's office at the time. And I remember talking to Kristjan. I knew then that this guy was going to make things happen. He was talking about some self-funded crop insurance, something we don't even think about here in the United States. We always have the government subsidized products here. But Kristjan was always willing to think outside to try to find those solutions and didn't rely on government, didn't rely on others to come up with what he needed to do to grow his farm. And we know today he's got a much larger operation in Canada than he had back in 2008. And our numbers are a little bit different than what you shared earlier too. So, but anyway, we're a farming operation based in Indiana. Family actually came to the country in the U.S. Back in the late 1600s from Switzerland, both sides. And finally found our way towards Indiana. I still say they hit a rock or something with the wheel of the wagon with 9 kids on it and a dairy cow in tow. And that's where my ancestors called it home. And this plow is the first plow that broke ground on that farm back in the day. So a lot of history right here in Indiana.
Good. We always say, Kip, that none of us chose the dirt we farm on. It's where the donkey ran out of water.
Understood. So I've had, you look back over the years, I got out of high school, started farming right away, started a family right away, started farming right away. And I think it was about 1985 then, I got to the point of saying, we've got to run this more of a business. My parents were really good at that already, but we needed to take it to the next level. And that's when we got involved in doing a lot of different specialty contracts, seed corn, and we got into a lot of vegetable crops as well. But then we really amplified our commercial crop segment as well, and trying to create that coordinated supply chain. But so we've grown significantly from those early days when I graduated from high school with 500 acres to where we are today, near that 20,000 mark. But, and we got our own grain elevator operations, we took this view of running it as a business, believing the numbers, making sure we're capturing all the numbers. And today, the tools we have available to us, the digitization of U.S. agriculture and Canadian agriculture, I think it really gives us the ability to really understand what's going on our farms to make good executable choices to make sure we remain in business, but we thrive as well.
I noticed on the website the term you used for your first job at Tom's Farms was production technician. You're gonna have to explain that one to me.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying farmhand, but I'm proud of that. I think it's, it doesn't matter what business you start in. I think it's good to start down on the ground level, where things are made at. When we first started, it was just Dad and I, and Mom kept the records and everything, and of course kept all of us fed, and took care of the records and the transactions and the business side of it. But Dad and I did everything. We had cattle at the time. We had some hogs, but we were responsible from sun up to sundown, and usually on both sides of that sometimes to get things done. So I was qualified as a farm technician then, but you have to continue to change because you want to make sure you're growing that business, but providing the opportunities for other people to come up along the way as well. So it's, I'm sure it's very similar to what Kristjan's done in Canada.
I think Evan too, right? I was watching a Mark Andreessen podcast the other day, and Kip, you'll be able to, you've probably even met the guy I'm going to talk about, but they said, why does Elon run companies different than other people? And they said two things. One, he just is insanely curious to understand absolutely everything about the business. Well, the one joy of a family business is you do actually understand everything because you've probably done everything at least once, right? Our parents forced us to. And then the second thing he does is every week he solves the biggest problem. So while everybody else is writing white papers and having board meetings about what the problems are, he just gets together with the right people and solves it, right? And as I said, jokingly, you've probably spent some time with Elon, knowing you and some of the people you know, but I think that's probably one of the reasons I, just wanted to talk to you all the time is you had done everything on your farm and you had these visionary ideas, but you were always able to break it down to what we need to do today or next month in order to, have a chance for an idea to come true.
You brought up a point there, and I think it's what you see in all entrepreneurs, and yourself is you're really included in this. In fact, you highlight it, but it's curiosity. What can I do to do better? And you're curious to how maybe some other business in your community or a friend owns, or maybe a distance from you, just how do they function? What can we do in watching their business and applying that to our own business? There's no sense in reinventing the wheel. Look at what they're doing, but be curious. I think that's one of the hallmarks or the main pillars of anyone that really wants to grow a business. So yeah, there's Mark Andreessen. He was actually one of our Apex meetings one year. Came and spoke. Yeah. I think Sig Gorham got him in because I think he was actually one of the investors in Granular at the time. So certainly worked out well for a lot of people, and I really wish it could have kept moving because I believe it was headed in the right trajectory or pathway to help farmers understand what's going on in their farms and measure their data, especially with today with the digitization that we have available to us.
Yeah, I think with AI today, it could find a whole nice new speed, right? I think one thing I'd like you to explain is, if I remember correctly, at one point in time, it was your focus on seed corn that probably led you down to Argentina. But one, do you still have the acres down there? And then two, has the government change made it a little more friendly than it was a decade ago when we were talking about it?
Yeah, so we started farming. It started out, I did some consulting for a seed company in Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. Did that for about 5 years. I always went down there, I'll be honest with you, when I came home, I thought I was going down there as a consultant to share ideas and help improve productivity. I probably came home with more that I learned down there during that time than what I took and gave to them. So it was a great period of time in my life to make friends, to be curious about what was going on and how they grew their businesses down there, how they produce. And but at the end of that 5-year consulting, I got, it's 1999, I believe it was, and we started farming in Argentina at that point in time and start producing seed. And we had to revolutionize the production model a little bit because the company was actually doing the production and not the farmer. So there was a lack of connectivity or how can I say it, responsibility to make sure you maximize yields. So we went in there with a different vision, more or less of what we have in the United States, and we increased productivity. We were an all-in contract. I mean, we did everything from the beginning of the process to the end and try to change it. And that's what they're using there today. We pulled out about 18, 20 years later, got out of Argentina, but we went through the movement away from the dollar as their anchor currency, went back to the Argentine peso, which that hurt. If we'd had debt there, it'd been one thing, but we didn't have any debt there. It was all cash business for us, investing there. But we learned a lot during that 20 years, and today they are in a much better place. I was down there and spoke, and actually got to meet up with the trade minister, got to meet up with the ag minister, and they are a country right now that are very closely aligned and wanting to do more with the U.S. And this is where the opportunities and some of the things I've been able to do, you really see where there's some solutions out there to solve some of the problems we have today. And I know we're kind of weaving around here on this a little bit, but when I look at Canada, I look at the United States, I look at Argentina, there's a powerhouse. And we're not a part of the BRICS. BRICS are probably our largest competition going forward into the future here. And I think this is time for the United States, Canada, and countries like Argentina, especially under Milei's leadership. I think we need to craft some trade deals to work together. So long answer to a short question, but hopefully I took care of it for you.
So he took it. He already made the shift. So we went political already. So now I gotta ask my first question on that side of it. So when you shift from production to agriculture, I'm not saying you've left it, but you've shifted more into kind of sitting on a whole bunch of boards, and I'd list them out, but honestly, on the bio I read, there was many. And then the councils and the political realm. Why the shift, I guess, for starters? And have you enjoyed the process along the way, I guess, would be my questions.
First of all, I will always be classified as a farmer. I've done that for 50 years. That's number one. Okay. Yeah. I may have been an ambassador for a couple of years from 2019 to 21, but I still consider myself a farmer. That was just a change in my pathway and the opportunities I got to see some things around the world. But when I look at some of the councils and boards and things I serve on, a lot of them are philanthropic, to be honest with you. A lot of them are involved in advancing agriculture, making sure that we have a voice at the table, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or Brussels, Belgium, or Rome, Italy. There's lots of places we need to have our voice. And I'll be honest with you, we haven't had a strong voice in a lot of those places for a long time. And I think it comes down to the individuals, each one of us taking the time to pick up the phone and talk to that member of parliament or that member of the Senate or the House and reach out and have that connectivity. That's who they want to talk to. And until we start doing that, we're probably not going to have a strong voice. Yeah, our commodity associations do their part, and they do a lot of good work. And I think they do a lot to try to open up new markets. But when it comes down to really the nitty gritty of all this, you need to get involved with your own people, and you need to do it directly. They want to see your face. They don't want to see someone that works in an office in K Street and sometimes in Washington, D.C. They want to meet the farmer and talk to them.
So, I mean, I'll piggyback on that one a bit. I'll go back to my first night at TPAP. I'm pretty sure this is the first time I met you. You might not remember. I was a young kid, kind of enthralled. So I went down a day early, and I went down to the buffet basically to eat supper. And Danny was sitting there, so he asked if I wanted to sit with him. And I can't remember. Chris is your one son. What's the other one? Kyle. So I think it was Chris was coming down, and you were just dropped him off, and you saw Danny and I sitting there. So you came and sat down, and there's two pieces I still live with to this day. We were talking obviously about farming and farm management, and we got into a pretty big discussion on risk because I was kind of deep in helping build the private insurance company at the time, so understanding the ins and outs. But there's two comments that came. Danny asked one. I told a story that we were trying to expand, north to south because storms move west to east typically in Canada. And so that way we couldn't have a hailstorm wipe out the whole farm. And Danny goes, wow, like, have you ever thought of maybe another country? Like if your big risks are policy and currency, you should have a mimicked operation in another country. And you've got a pretty good one not too far from your farm because we're literally 60 miles from North Dakota. I was like, Jesus, not a horrible question. And then your comments added on, we got into the policy discussion in that specifically at that time I had a pretty good understanding of insurance. So Mother Nature can actually be handled pretty well by good management and insurance for the one black swan that hits you every 10 years, etc. But you pushed me pretty hard on, like, what do you think about policy? Because I think it's one of our biggest risks if managed incorrectly. And you talked about the same thing, that if more of us don't put any effort into it, it will get worse, not better, because of the voice.
So, I'll talk a little bit about policy, and then I want to move it over to what can we do as farmers ourselves to help manage some of that risk. So first, policy, we have to get involved in the discussion. A lot of times, I think you and I have communicated in the past, a lot of the numbers that come in from the Census Bureau in the United States, at least, you classify who is a farmer. And, they still say there's 1.5% of the population is farmers, but you really break that down. It's only a small portion of that 1.5% are actually run it as a business. And I'm not taking away anything from anybody that wants to have a small farm that's involved in supplying local co-ops and schools and groceries and food supply places. That's all important. We need that. And it's all part of the whole ecosystem. But when we look at scale, there's just a few people that really match that scale. And a lot of times it gets to me, people, you're an industrial farm, we hear that all the time. When you look at it, typically it's a group of a number of members of a farm that just came together to bring in their ability to take their capital and focus it in on buying, the long-term assets and actually bringing different skills and expertise to run the farm. So there's lots of reasons we have that farm structure, but when you get to Washington, D.C., a lot of times they'll look at you and they'll say, well, you're a big farm. You've got size and scale that, others can't compete with. Well, we're actually subject to a lot greater scrutiny by a lot of different people because of the size and scale we are. That goes all across. I don't care if you're a poultry producer, you're a corn producer, cranberries, or whatever it may be. That's just the way it works in the United States. Now, so we have to be involved in those discussions so those policymakers understand things. The next thing I want to go to is how we manage some risk. And, I just came back from, if you've never been able to attend one of them, I would highly suggest attending an Aim Point war game. It's an organization that's based out of Columbus, Ohio. It's a number of individuals that graduated from West Point in New York. They've all been in the Army, obviously. All have served our nation. But they're all Aggies as well. So they take that wargaming approach and look at agriculture and say, how can we look at the system that we have in play today, the global geopolitical risk, the internal economic challenges we have in the United States or globally, and how do we make sure we survive? And I just came back from one a few weeks ago. And one of the things I got from that is manage that risk. As you said, go across the border into North Dakota, so you're kind of working on some U.S. policy and some Canadian policy, and hopefully, if you got a downturn in one, the other one to be up. What we really came down to is the BRIC nations are getting so strong in commodity production. They haven't done a lot of value add. We know that the demand for protein is going to continue to increase. And one thing that we got from this was we probably need to take our farm operations and say, maybe we need to merge, or we need to invest, or we need to buy and get our way into protein production. I mean, granted, our life's pretty simple. It's not simple, let's put it that way. But it's much easier when you're producing just grain crops. If we could, though, get into a point where we're producing proteins as well, animal proteins, whether it's pork, poultry, beef, or aquaculture or dairy, I think there's some greater opportunity for us to manage that risk a little bit better. And I think that's the next wave of probably consolidation that we can see take place, but we need to be prepared for it. Again, we want to manage risk, and that's one of the ways that I think we can do it.
And I think we're starting to see that up here, Hebes, with the cost of land where it's moving and stuff. It's forcing guys into those value add objectives as a way of diversifying risk without taking on too much capital, I think.
But I think on top of it, you're going to see, and Kip, I'm sure you'll have an opinion on this too, is that even in the last bill that was trying to get pushed through in the last 48 hours in the U.S., but in the last time we had the Canadian negotiations, governments are getting to be less and less enthralled with the government risk programs for agriculture. And there are other countries in the world that have completely reduced them. But I mean, it actually got highlighted quite a few times on Twitter or X this week on some of it that was in there. So we'll have to become better risk managers in agriculture if those programs change or are less subsidized, specifically less subsidized. And I guess it'd be good to get your opinion on where you think the U.S. is heading over the next 10 years when it comes to some of the risk management programs, and if you see change or if you think they'll just kind of stay the same.
Well, if the U.S., our debt right now is about $35 trillion, and it grows by about $1 trillion every 3 or 4 months. I think there's going to be less appetite for Congress to support some of these different initiatives in agriculture. And this is where I say, okay, if we know that's probable, we don't know if it's going to happen for sure, but if there's a chance that's going to happen, let's go back to the drawing boards and say, what can we do to help manage through that? And is there a way we can use some of the sciences that are available to us today, whether it's the way we've digitized our farms, the way we operate, the way we can manage our risk in investments and our annual inputs across our farm? Is there things we can know about the weather now that give us a little more insight to maybe adjust our risk profile? I think there's some things that we can be doing that we're not doing because we just lean over on that government subsidy as a crutch. And I know there's lots of people in the U.S. who would like to hear me say that as a farmer, but we need to be looking, because I don't want to wait till the last minute and then all of a sudden that subsidy goes away and we're not prepared for it. What I'm saying is, let's find out ways that we can do this, invest in those technologies to make sure we can manage that risk. You've done that in Canada already, and I don't know why we aren't doing more in the United States.
Well, I think too, it's not even, I mean, we have the data to prove it. It's not just you giving an opinion. There are too many farms that if they did an accrual statement and they charge themselves rent on the land that they own, and even if it's even half of what it should be, and took out the government subsidy of whatever that insurance payment is, they don't make any money. It's the real estate's making the money. So it's not that, like, and that's what I tell Ottawa lots of times when I bring it up too, is it's not my opinion. It's just data, and I can't lie about data, but what I can use is data to try and make us better, right? And so I'm the same as you. I think I'm not saying private's the only way. I think there's got to be ways where we see a lot more collaboration between agriculture, private, whether that be in insurance and in finance. I mean, access to capital and in Canada is a pretty tough thing too, because our banks are set up different than yours, but I'm sure access to capital in the US is one of the tough parts. And insurance, but it should be between farmers, the private companies and the government, that we can find a way to make P3 collaboration really move forward. But to have that, we also got to be okay with change.
Yeah, we've got to be able to accept the change. And that's one thing, as you know, in agriculture, a lot of people don't want to accept change. And if you look at the average age of the producer in the United States, it's my age, So, and a lot of people in my category where I'm at, they don't want to make those changes. I like the change. I think it brings on new challenges to us. But so going back to the insurance, I don't know why we aren't doing more, creating some collectives that we could go together and we can get the actuarials and everything, but go out here and create a capital. Get other producers to come in and get good producers involved with it. Let the government have the high risk ones if that's what they want to do. But let's form groups of producers that have low risk, that are very stable, and see if we can create an insurance platform for them. We looked at that probably 7-8 years ago, and I think it come down. It's still hard to override that 60% of subsidy at that point in time. But we may get there sooner or later. Again, with $35 trillion in debt, as we look at a farm bill.
I've always said my dream is a voucher system, right? So if the government took their 60% subsidy, that's just what they subsidize the price, right? Then they still have the actuarial risk on the bad years where they blow through their stop loss insurance. So if they wanted it to be a known number on their balance sheet, just pick the number. In Canada, it's $29 an acre is the average subsidy. So pick 15 or pick 20. In the US, it might be 50 or 60 because corn and beans are higher. And it could be a known number on their balance sheet. And as long as you submit your invoice, whether you bought the government insurance or a private, or maybe yours is more, you're worried only about weather, so you buy like a weather derivative, then you get the voucher. And if you don't buy anything, you don't get any voucher. but it would let different ideas thrive. And yet it's not the government walking away. They're just saying, have a plan. We'll help you by that plan. But if your plan doesn't work, we're not bailing you out.
That's right. Yeah. So, I think about it, no different car insurance, right? If you live in New York City and you own a Ferrari, insurance is going to be a little different price than what's going to be if you live in Leesburg, Indiana, obviously. So let's see if we can get some insurance pricing on the crop insurance side that would reflect those kind of changes too. I don't know why we don't do it. I think there's a number of reasons why we haven't done it, but won't go into that right now. But we need to be looking for alternatives.
I'll take one.
Absolutely.
Since I know Kristjan's having a heyday here. So for me, I'm gonna take a little Canadian approach here because I'd like your opinion. I mean, with what you see as the new incoming government, I mean, biofuels, canola, that's a big effect north of the border for us. How do you see with their mandate on oil and stuff? How do you see that affecting the biofuel industry?
Yeah. So the oil industry is a very effective lobby in Washington, D.C. and across our state houses in the country. We need oil. There's no question about it. I mean, anyone that thinks we can get away without it, we need to move to all electric or whatever kind of beliefs they have. I think we need to get back to drilling. I know to benefit the Canadian economy. I look at the provinces where you're at, and I come down into the States, into North Dakota, and I look at all the way to Texas and across the United States. There's we're an oil-rich nations, and we need to be using that to our benefit. In terms of biofuels, they're always going to be protective of that real estate, right? The oil industry is. They're going to want to make sure that we don't get higher blends. But the reality is we save consumers money if we get to E15. It was a part of this CR that's been discussed over the past 3 days here. It's something that wouldn't cost taxpayers anything in terms of actual outlay of money. It was just to get to E15. And we'd save consumers money on their fuel choices. And at the same time, while cleaning up the environment, if that's one of your goals. And it should be everybody's goal. But I'm hoping that we see E15 become a reality sooner than later. In terms of sustainable aviation fuel, let's go. We need more value add. Because I can tell you, like I said, we're not going to keep pace with these brick economies. Right now, in Brazil, they can produce an acre of soybeans for about $100 an acre less than what we can in the United States. So are we going to compete with that? No, I don't think so. So let's find a way to add value here, whether it's through protein, whether it's through sustainable aviation fuels, whether it's through the biofuels. We can make that happen here. I think fermentation is another opportunity for us, but I'm getting away from your biofuels comment, but I think it's here to stay. And I think anything that cleans up the environment can be replenished on an annual basis will remain strong. But again, when I look at this administration, President Trump knows that it was rural America that took him across the line. 65-70% of rural Americans supported him in this election. One of the biggest components that has changed agriculture, increased productivity, increased farm incomes has been biofuels. So we can't be walking away from it anytime soon. We need to stay with it. We need to strengthen it.
Perfect.
So I think obviously we could go straight right to Mr. Trump's comments that he should just tariff Canada and Mexico, but I have my own opinions on that. So I'll lead it as a little nicer question to you. I really like your theory of the non-BRIC countries that are commodity rich, finding a way to have super strong coalitions and trade agreements in order to, compete against the growing, BRIC nations. So if you got to be lead negotiator for a day and could solve all world problems, what would be your suggestion to Canada, US, Argentina, that group of countries to be where we need to be in a decade to compete with the BRIC?
I think we need to start those discussions and finding out where we have common ground, where we can counter a lot of these other maligned actors around the world, whether it's Russia, China. China is 70% of the BRICS. So let's just face it. This is a discussion about China.
Yep.
We really need to focus in terms of Trump and tariffs. Listen, I believe that it's the means to the end by him talking about tariffs. He loves no more than to create a deal. He'll throw out the word tariffs, and it's a real viable threat. Especially when I looked at Mexico, if you got a Chinese manufacturer wanting to come in and build Chinese cars and ship them to the United States, will be nothing more than a data collection device for the Chinese Communist Party. So I'd see high tariffs on them. But we need Mexico, we need Canada, we need a strong trading bloc amongst us. And I think we'll find ways to work together. Again, Trump wants to make deals. He's not about blocking us all. We need to also figure out this. And when I think about trade, I look at the fertilizer industry, I look at the chemical industry, or the companies that produce the products that control our weeds, insects, and diseases. And, nearly 70% of the U.S. products are produced offshore. And a majority of those are produced in China, an adversary. And I know in my term of serving as an ambassador, we know that China is our largest existential threat. There's lots of things people don't understand about China, but we've got to make sure that we bring back some of these supply chains to our friends and allies around the world, whether that's Canada, whether it's the UK, Australia, New Zealand, members of the Five Eye. We need to make sure that we have those components of the building blocks for food and agriculture production back home, creating jobs for Americans and Canadians, and making sure that it allows us to have free trade amongst our countries.
I mean, that was the same. I mean, I was texting you, I think it was 6 months ago, because I got to sit in on Robert Lighthizer, right? And it's fairly obvious his opinion on trade with China, and read his book after. And like I said to Evan, I mean, the neat part is that the majority of Canada's trade to the U.S. is we send you guys a whole bunch of raw commodities of which you value add and make way more money on than us. So it would be a backwards idea to not do the trade. And at the same time, when you talk about getting, those supply chains back, I think both Canada and the U.S. need to really look at their regulatory environment. And number one, if it's approved in one country, then it should be approved in the other. But number two, part of the reason all this stuff's made in China is it just costs less to get the regulatory side done. So we need to cut red tape, which obviously has been talked a bunch, a significant amount in both countries, that's part of the issue, and that we need to become a little more entrepreneurial within government.
Yeah, I mean, it is about the regulatory environment. And the cost structure. Whether you're any one of the major manufacturers of crop care products, there's only a few places in the world you can get some of these, and one of them's China. And we've allowed that to happen, and there's no reason why we shouldn't take a fresh look. It's going to take a long time. You're not going to bring back a chemical plant overnight. It's going to take 10 years and billions of dollars to produce it here. But my point is, what happens if you wake up tomorrow morning and you're not going to wake up in the morning. You're going to see it at 2 o'clock when it happens, because you're going to be looking at your Twitter feed or Instagram. But you're going to know if all of a sudden China invades Taiwan. What happens to that supply chain that we had coming out of China? Yeah. Those are the fears that I have. It may get fixed in a period of time, and we may get flowing again, just like Russian fertilizer right now coming to the U.S. and Canada. It continues on. But again, why? Why are we subsidizing someone that's our adversary? Why are we doing business with them? Let's bring those jobs back to the United States and back to Canada, and make sure we employ our own people here and create those jobs and that economic opportunity for our own nation.
I mean, COVID, there's a whole bunch of negative things I can say about COVID, but the one thing it taught us is the precariousness of the supply chain, right? I mean, there was actual chemicals that could not get here on time. And it was because actually one of them is manufactured right in Saskatchewan, but they couldn't get the mineral, right? The byproduct that they needed to manufacture it. And it was coming from China. The supply chain was completely disrupted. And so, I think it brought some awareness back that finally some of these critical risks, because I'm of the same opinion as you, why do we have free trade to funnel basically dollars into countries that are pretty vividly trying to compete against us in a whole bunch of ways, instead of funneling those dollars into our own country and our own people and our own economies, and working together better to do it.
I get a lot of heat from people saying, well, stop saying what you're saying about the Chinese all the time. They're a major trading partner for us for corn and soybeans. And hey, I get that discussion. and no reason to not be concerned about it. But when you look at their acceptance of biotech over the last 2-3 years, and then how it's spreading out across more acres, within 5 years, they'll be self-sufficient on corn production. 5 years. They don't need Brazil. They don't need U.S. anymore. In 7 or 8 years, they have soybean production to the point where they need to have it. So if that's the case, then they can feed their own protein production or their own pork production that are 10 times the size of the United States. They're on their own. So China's not a long-term customer. We need to be finding new customers and new uses for our products. And that same goes for Canada. We can't think that China's going to be here forever for us. They want to be self-sufficient on food. And whether it's produced in in China or in Africa, they're going to own it. They're going to make sure they have that supply chain. And, Xi Jinping knows the revolutions that's taken place over time, whether it's in Russia, across Africa, and other places. When people run out of food, he doesn't want that to happen, and he's doing everything he can in his power to make sure they have their food power.
Canadian farmers are probably more well aware of China than anywhere, right? Because specifically on canola, I mean, we produce the majority of it for the world, and if anything politically goes against China, they just slap some sort of problem against canola. Turn a ship around because it had something, or throw a tariff against it. It's their automatic comeback. I even remember when we quit, we put tariffs like it was on electric vehicle batteries, which we virtually produced none. Really, we just kind of followed what the U.S. was doing, and it affected canola trade, right? So food is just the place that countries go to right away to try to inflict pain back, because food is something that everybody needs. And yeah, so I'm on the same page as you. Is what is the next China, India, and make sure that North America becomes the place that can feed all those areas with our commodities and can value add and send finished products and raw products, whatever each country needs.
Well, part of the training as an ambassador before I went to mission is we understood what was the 4 pillars that a nation stood on to have national power. And the first was diplomatic abilities, their ability to avert or take opportunities of different issues that may be taking place around the world. Number 2 was informational technologies, having the ability to access information about any place around the world to understand your geopolitical risk or economic opportunities. Number 3 was to have a strong economy, and that doesn't happen unless you have 1 and 2 there. So you got to have a strong economy, making sure you're exporting your excess. That provides for higher wages and continued growth in your economy. And number 4 is military. Well, I always contend there's 2 others, and one is food, and one is energy. The other one is energy. So if a nation is not food secure, they're insecure. So same with energy. If you don't have the energy to heat your households, to run your trucks, your cars, whatever it is in your economy that survives on energy, you're in trouble. So there's actually 6 components of national power, and you need to make sure you maintain those. If you don't, you're subject to the existential threat of countries like China.
Kristjan, you got your policy trade done?
Never ends. Never ends.
So I want to pull them back because we do consider ourselves a bit of a management podcast, not just an agriculture podcast. So I want to get you from a management and business standpoint. If we look back over the years of success you've had, I want to know some of the mistakes or some of the lessons you've learned that could take some of our listeners and avoid those same mistakes. Because, I mean, you've obviously done a lot in the agriculture industry. I'd like to know some of the lessons that you could instill us with.
Oh, boy. We don't have enough time to talk about all the mistakes I've made. I think one thing is certain. If you're not making mistakes, you're not taking enough risk. And I've always been one of not wanting to do what everybody else is doing all the time. Do things a little bit differently or do things radically different at times. Maybe I didn't take enough. I look back and we took risk and more than most, but I think we could have taken more risk in that. But, one of the biggest things as I look back over my lifetime is I really want to focus now, and I'm not old by any means. I consider myself young yet, and I think numbers mean nothing. But it's making sure you have an operation that can span generations after you're gone. There was a family I met in Italy, the Antinori family. They're probably one of the largest wine estates globally. And there they were. They were operating, I think they were on generation 20 or 21, something like that, in that business. And it all surrounds with the land and the business and the acumen that they brought in to run that business. But I think that's the biggest thing is it's taken so much work for Kristjan and you to get to where you are today. And you don't want to see it go away in one generation. So I think it's to instill plans, instill the ability of the people in the management of that business to make sure it goes on into future generations. If that's what you're wanting to do, if you're wanting to create that legacy. Because it takes a lot of work to get it to where you're at today. You took a lot of risk. You had your sleeves rolled up. You spent a lot of 24-hour days out there. I know how you guys operate in Canada. Seeing that canola crop. Why give it up in one generation? I think there's so much energy, kinetic energy moving forward, getting this done that we need to make sure that we see it going into the future. That's something I wish I would, I'm doing okay with that, but I want to do more on it. I focus quite a bit of my time on it right now, making sure it does just that.
Well, and I noticed when you said the word curious, because it always takes me back to the Whitman quote of be curious, not judgmental. And I think in agriculture especially, we could probably put that to use a little more.
Absolutely. It's there's plenty of opportunities out there. I think so oftentimes, farmers, we get wrapped up in our own local communities because that's where our business is, right? I mean, some work in the sections that they're at, some in their townships, their counties, their state. Maybe they get across the country and have operations in different places around the United States or around Canada. But I think, we need to be very open to looking at opportunities far beyond the borders that we typically restrict ourselves to in our own mind oftentimes.
Then I got one last. So he usually asks this question to every guest, so I'm going to throw it by you. And we call it kind of, what I call it a segment or what, but it's called Back to the Future. And what I want to know is I got 3 questions for you. Where do you see the industry today in 5 years? What are you doing right now to get there? And then what are you not going to change to get there?
I think number one, where do I see the industry today? I see an industry today that's very built upon systems of the past. We've changed very little. We're still thinking that we can be competitive in a global landscape by just producing commodities. And that if we aren't financially successful in doing so, that the government needs to come in and support us along the way. 5 years from now, where I'd like to see us at, I'd like to see us discovering more value-add opportunities, opening up new markets around the world, creating new trade alliances with other partners, making sure that we are strong, because this BRIC challenge isn't going away. It's here to stay. And, so I think in 5 years, that's where we need to be. We need to have more trading partners with the United States, just like we have OPEC. Why don't we have something for food exporting countries? I brought that up a number of times. I'm not saying we want to fix prices of food, but make sure that we have some strength in our ability to negotiate around the world. So 1 year, 5 year, and what was that third question?
What are you doing right now to get there? So now you told us what 5 years looks like. What are you doing right now?
Yeah, so looking for ways to manage that risk through diversifying the industry, our business a little bit more. And it could be just geographical diversity with the crops we're growing, or it could be diversity in the products we produce. Whether it's protein plus the grain business and seed business. So we have to take a hard look at that now, because that doesn't happen overnight. We know that. You gotta get your arms around the capital. You gotta make sure you got the right people in place. That's the biggest thing in this industry. It's people. It's not capital. We can access capital most oftentimes, find somebody to work with you on it, but it's people. It's getting the right people in the right places to get where you need to be, and make sure they all have that curious mind. Every one of them's got to have that curious mind.
Okay. Kristjan, I'll give you one more, and then I got a last question. So,
yeah. So what am I going to say? You want to know what I'm going to throw a softball, Kip? So we're both good friends, and probably call Danny a mentor. So we're working on, a few of us are working on different projects to make sure that legacy stays on forever. But give me your top two pieces of advice, or Danny would prefer it not to call advice. Let's call it wisdom that he left you with over the years.
Yeah. I met Danny in 95, I think, for the first time, TPAP 1. And that was like the second year of it. And then I went to TPAP 2, and then we started Apex. And then he served on our board of directors at the farm, and I served on an advisory board with him at Granular. So I had a lot of exposure to Danny over time, and was always had a lot of very candid discussions with him. And what I always liked is, he had the mindset of, like I do now, is watch other businesses. Don't think you need to reinvent everything all the time. Think about how other businesses succeed and where they find success, and how once they find that success, they put all their capital and their human talent behind it to make it grow, and then they look for the next one to chase down. I think that's probably some of the best advice Danny gave to me, is look beyond the borders of the farm gate. Not always look within the industry for solutions. Look beyond the industry, because there's lots of opportunities out there. It was him, and it was more of a combination of him and David Cole would do a lot of that. And I think we need to pay attention to that, and always have that in our mind every day we make decisions of. In fact, I always say, what would Danny do? If he was here today, what would he do? Would he invest in that additional section of land, or would he put up some more grain plant silos? Just what would Danny do? And I think that quite often, because I didn't have a college education. I stopped at high school, and TPAP was my extension into learning more, and it's because I was curious. And I thank Danny for all that.
Kristjan, give me yours. Since you asked him, I'm going to ask you.
I actually got a quote from Danny that hangs in my office, right? He hit one of his favorite lines that he put in so many articles was, the opportunities will always belong to those that see them before they become public or noticeable by the population, right? And so that was just Danny's fancy way. Most of the times when he was talking about that, he had to dip a chew in and was just a normal human like the rest of us. It was just his way of saying two things. One, be curious, and two, be humble, right? Look everywhere for ideas, and don't ever think that somebody somewhere in the world's not kicking your ass at everything you're doing, right? And it might not be at the whole of the outcome, but if there's 100 steps in the outcome, someone's beating you or is better than you at every step, right? And I mean, I talk lots. Some of the best HR advice I got ended up on a plane beside an American that owned 4 resorts in Mexico. And I talked about rain days being hard to deal with on the farm. It's like, try owning 4 resorts in Mexico when it rains. What's your rain day plan? I'm like, well, what do you mean? So, well, we have an SOP for rain days. Like if you get up in the morning and it rains, you got to move all the chairs off the beach into the rooms, and here's the games you got to set up, and then we got to track that data on are more people at karaoke or at poker, and then we'll tweak the day for the next day. Oh, that's actually kind of easy. Maybe I should have a rain day plan. But in the world of agriculture, you say Mother Nature's hard to deal with, and everyone's like, yeah, geez, it's just horrible, right? Nobody comes up with the idea. So that was my big things for Danny, is one, be curious, and 2, be humble.
Let me ask you both a question here. So, obviously, it's not just so much news is focused on the United States, but I would try to watch Canada, obviously, as our neighbor, maybe our 51st state sometime. I don't know. I keep hearing rumors. But, we've seen you had a finance minister, your vice prime minister left. We hear things about Trudeau. And I've watched in the international fora, what goes on in Europe a lot of times, and I see what takes place with the Farm to Fork initiative in Europe, and I see that kind of seems like it's moving a little bit into Canada. What's your longer range thoughts about Canada?
Go ahead, Chris.
I joked one time, Kip, when I was in Brussels that I think a lot of bad Canadian ideas are actually made in Brussels. They get shipped across the ocean, come down the St. Lawrence, and exit stage left in Quebec and in Ottawa. So, yeah, there's obviously a lot of turmoil in Ottawa right now, but I mean, I think we're pretty similar to maybe the last 3 or 4 years for you guys, is that I'm not saying nothing got done, but there's been a real lack of leadership, right? Every answer is a political answer. Nobody's really willing to take any risk. And right now the theory is just kind of print money to get out of trouble, right? Our debt per capita is worse than yours. So I think long term for Canada, to be honest, we need two things. One, we need a government change right now. Pierre Poilievre looks like he's kind of most likely going to be the next leader. But on top of that, we need a rebuilt and strong Liberal Party, which would be your Democrats. And that I look back, one of my favorite prime ministers actually in history is Paul Martin, who was a Liberal prime minister. And typically, I'm not a Liberal person, but I'm just a business person that wants logical minds to keep moving the country forward. So we need two things. We need a government change to have a vision for this country. And I think that's why I asked the question on the BRICS. I think there could be huge alignment, not only between Canada and the US, but between key partners, that there's our long-term goal. How do we create a group of countries to compete with the BRICS, right? It's like coaching youth sports. You got to have a reason to get up in the morning on things you agree with, right? And 80% of the stuff, specifically between Canada and the US, I mean, let's focus on commodities, let's focus on energy, let's focus on critical minerals, and let's focus on bringing manufacturing back to North America. There's 80% of what we need to do. 20%, I agree, there's going to be disagreements on the side, but we should be able to get on the same page on 80. So for me, for Canada, one, we just need a change, because sometimes that's what it takes. But the change is really, we need some leadership. We need to reduce regulation, because we spent a lot of time doing that. And we do need the Liberal Party to rebuild, because we both know back and forth over the next 20 years, there's going to be both parties in power, and there's can be super strong people in both parties. And then my last point, and I struggle with this a lot, is that as a world, and specifically North America, I just think we need a little bit, a dose of logic and awareness. Like you look at the amount of money in our federal budget that's handed out around the world, with the amount of issues we have internally, right? Or ROK. I mean, I want to be a good person too, but the amount of refugees we've taken in, and then we provide housing and welfare for them for, months on end. There's no limited term, which then forces you to go do something and become a part of the Canadian economy. Like I said, I just needs awareness and logic. And so I think what takes that is that increase in jobs needs to be not an increase in government jobs. It needs to be an increase in private jobs, and slowly awareness and logic actually comes back into the culture.
And since you took most of my answers, but the big one for me, I think, the common sense standpoint, whether it's awareness or common sense, we just need a little bit more of that in Ottawa. And on the other side, do I think that the change in government's going to do a drastic change? I don't see a drastic change. And part of it is, you guys brought someone in that literally has an outline of, we're going to do this, this, and this to make the change. We haven't heard that yet. So until I hear that coming out of the party that is going into power, it's really hard to say that we're going to have huge changes across the country. And then the last one is natural resources. We have a country that's rich, whether it's agriculture, gas, oil, and right now there's pretty much a war on it. The eastern part of our country is literally shutting down production of what could be some of our most wealth across the entire country, and instead we're going into trillions and trillions of debt. That to me is the big change that has to happen. Is we need to actually, whether it's drill baby drill or whatever you want to use the phrase, we need to start getting our natural resource sector back to being a powerhouse, and that's where I see it.
They always say, true wealth only comes from one place, and that's from the earth. And I look at what you have in Canada and the center part. The guys on the fringe seem to spend all the money, right, and create all the rules. But you guys are producing the crops. You're producing the oil, and you produce the critical components in terms of fertilizer to grow crops. You do a lot for the world in those areas, but yet you're ignored oftentimes. And the same goes for the United States. And we need to get back and focused on making sure we have food secure nations, and make sure that we aren't regulated by some bureaucrat that's sitting on his couch that hasn't been in the office of the government agency where he's supposed to have been the last 3 or 4 years, writing out a conservation plan of how we should operate our farm while they're watching days of our lives. So No, I'm very much. Let's get back to what the utility of government is supposed to be. Get them out of some places where they have their nose inside our tent right now, and let us get back to work and let us do what we do best, and that's feed, fuel, and clothe a growing world.
Well, I think, Ev, I'll make one point on the farm to fork, right? Is that because obviously our operation's quite involved in a couple of key projects in Canada on sustainability. But really we got involved for one reason. Our definition of sustainability is leave the land, the financial statements, the community, and our industry in a better state. And really we got involved to tell the government that, because their idea of sustainability in a lot of cases is financially non-viable. And then secondly, I don't know how many CEOs and government officials I've told, like, we're in a pretty good spot in Western Canada specifically. Like, I'll believe in sustainability when you're ready to write me a check, because one of the big things on regenerative is zero till. And I don't even remember not zero till farming, right? Our land isn't the best, but the crops we grow, we don't have to till. So we've been doing a lot of the practices that they want. And it's like, so around the world, you're preaching that this is one of the number one practices, and yet you're not willing to write me a check for doing it for 30 years. Do you actually care, or do you just want to talk? And so that's like, I believe that farmers overall, can we always be better? Absolutely. But farmers overall care about the land and the environment more than almost anybody on earth, right? You can come watch my 10 and 12-year-old kids run through my fields and eat the grain right out of the hopper, and we're proud of it. So as a government and as big companies, when you truly want to talk about agriculture sustainability, yeah, we want you to come talk to us, because we'll show you what we're doing. We're using a phosphate fertilizer that is set up on wastewater plants outside of cities. So we pull the extra phosphates out of their wastewater that's already went through their treatment plant, make it into fertilizer, and grow crops. So in fact, like, the city should be saying thank you, not you're doing everything wrong, right? And so that's my worry, is that farmers, we've always been humble, and it's maybe time to maybe not be quite as humble and show the world everything that we have done and that we have changed in the world of environment and sustainability. And then, are we going to get better with digital technologies? Absolutely we are. We know we are. But till the government's willing to write me a check right now for what I have done, I actually think they just want to talk about being better. They don't actually want to be better.
Yeah, I think it's farmers like us on this podcast here today, and many others out there that we want to do what's right for the environment. We want to do right to make sure that we have the freedom to operate in a free enterprise system, that we can be capitalist. We reinvest money, and there are those in the world that really want to look towards taking away property rights. They want to control what we do. They think they can do it better than us. There's no one better than the family farmer out here who has nothing more in his sights than to make sure he returns to Mother Earth and the family business to the next generation, and make sure it spans generations, not just the next one. So keep up the good work, Kristjan and Ivan. Pleasure being with you today.
So closing question for you, Kip. What's the future? I mean, you said that age is not a number. The number doesn't bother you. So what's the future for Kip Tom?
I don't know right now. I'm interviewed for a number of different roles within our government. We'll see what President Trump and his leadership team, transition team decide. Hopefully hear some things here very soon. Just want to make a difference and make sure there's a farmer's voice out there.
Yeah, I know, coming from us. I mean, Kip, I follow you pretty closely and look up to everything you do. So I hope you get a role. And I would say, I know you good enough to say that your number one job's farming. And really, I would assume a lot of the times the reason you're even looking at those roles is to ensure that your farm can operate, by making its own decisions for years and generations to come. And so can other farms. So hats off to you for doing that work. And yeah, good luck.
It'd be a lot easier to stay right home on the farm and do what I've done for 50 years. But I believe it's time you take the learnings you've had over those 50 years and apply them and help these policymakers make sure they're making the right decisions. And that's what I want to do.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kip, for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And that's The Truth About Ag. Thanks for joining us. The Truth About Ag podcast is a proud member of the Hebert Group, which includes Hebert Grain Ventures, Maverick Ag, and Farmer Coach. We appreciate the support. Lastly, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you have questions for a future podcast, please leave in the comments below. Thanks for listening.